All right, so I've gotten some inquiries asking about the Strategic Petroleum Reserve and what the current sales plan looks like, what kind of type of crude's coming out of it. And as I started to deep dive a little bit into that, I found some pretty interesting stuff. I thought it was interesting to me. So I figured we do a more in-depth, multi-part series on the Strategic Petroleum Reserve and go over some of the infrastructure that's tied to some of those storage facilities, some of the basics of the storage facilities. So in this part one, what we'll go over is kind of the historic storage levels, what the current program looks like that we're going through now with the Iran conflict that we're in, and then just some more of the basics of what the storage facilities are. So let's jump in. And for this, I just did some slides. We'll do some stuff on the platform in parts 2 through whatever we decide, however many we decide to do there. We'll go over some of the infrastructure with that. So let's dive in and just looking on a map and being able to visualize where these facilities are. There's 4 separate storage sites, and these are very large oil storage facilities along the Gulf Coast, as you can see. So we'll dive in and look at these kind of by size. So we'll start with the biggest facility, which is the Bryan Mound facility. That's in the Freeport, Texas area, as you can see there. And as you can see on the table here, it's about 247 million barrels of storage capacity there. You can see the breakout between sweet and sour crude that it holds, and then you can see their maximum drawdowns. So they can draw about 1.5 million barrels a day just out of this facility if they needed to. The second biggest one is in Louisiana here. It's near the Lake Charles area. This is the West Hackberry facility, 221 million barrels of storage capacity. You can see the split between sweet and sour is pretty even, and a little bit lower of a drawdown capacity there. Big Hill, similar size as West Hackberry, 170 million. There's the split there, and then a little over 1 million barrels a day is what it can withdraw from its storage facility. And then a smaller one, Bayou Choctaw, near Baton Rouge, 76 million barrels is all this facility is, and with a drawdown of about 500,000 barrels a day. So there's kind of the geographic look of where these facilities are. Now, what's interesting about these facilities is I think when most people think about crude oil storage facilities, certainly I did when I was new in the industry and thinking about storage, was you think about the above ground storage tanks. And certainly, this is the Bryan Mound facility you see here. You only see just a handful of above ground storage tanks. So these storage tanks are not holding 200 plus million barrels of oil. The oil is actually stored underground in underground caverns. So I'm not a huge expert on how the geological stuff works here, but I believe each of these little pad areas are injections into different caverns that hold this oil. So if you want an idea of what the cavern looks like, it looks kind of like this little 3D computer animated feature of what one of the Bryan Mound caverns looks like. This is about 2,000 feet underground, going down to 4,000 feet, and it is a salt dome storage cavern. So it's a geological formation that can hold crude oil. So that's what they do. They inject crude oil into this. When they need to pull it out, they actually inject water into this cavern, and that displaces the oil out of the cavern. So that's how the oil goes in and out of these, and it's not an above storage tank. It's below ground. That's what's holding all this crude oil in. And all 4 storage facilities are salt dome storage facilities. So let's take a look at what the storage levels at the combined Strategic Petroleum Reserve, so these are all 4 of these SPR sites combined, looks like. So if we rewind back about a decade, these were full. These were full storage facilities at right around 700 million barrels of storage was held there versus a capacity of just over 700 million. As you can see over time, the storage levels have fallen, and they fell dramatically in 2021, 22, and we'll get into that. But I've also included, and this is important to think about, I've included a black line on here, and the black line back in history back here is it closely matches what actually what the storage levels of the actual SPR is, but it does break away. The actual storage levels does break away in 2021 and 2022 when we did emergency sales out of the SPR to mitigate or reduce the impact of the Ukraine-Russia war, which spiked oil prices. So the black line here, and this is really important to note, is what the SPR would have drawn down on its own if just it was allowed to do its own thing with congressionally mandated sales. So something that a lot of people don't realize is it's in my opinion, a little bit unfortunate, but Congress over the last decade plus, and this is across multiple administrations, so it's not a political comment. Both sides are guilty of this. Congress and the presidential administrations have made the SPR a bit of a piggy bank to be able to tie sales out of the SPR to pay for certain bills that they want passed, certain tax cuts or spending bills that they want passed. A way to do that and to get that through the Congressional Budget Office with a good score is to tie Strategic Petroleum oil reserve sales to that to help pay for those bills. So the black line that you see here is the path the SPR would have taken if we just let the congressionally mandated sales happen over time. So those have been scheduled via multiple bills across multiple administrations, really from 2000, let's call it 2016 is kind of when it started. And there's sales scheduled all the way into 2031 tied to different bills. Now, you'll see the SPR drew down significantly more than that in 2021 and 2022. And that was because of the Ukraine-Russia war. So the Biden administration used their emergency powers to be able to sell oil out of this, out of the SPR. And what they did as this happened, and as we kind of got to these level here under 400 million barrels from over 600 million barrels, was they say, hey, we realized that these congressionally mandated sales were going to happen anyways. So a portion of what we've sold, we're just not going to complete these congressionally mandated sales that were going to happen anyways. We're just going to say we pulled those forward and sold those early. So what you see here, this black line, anything that was set to sell between 2022 and 2027 was essentially canceled by future congressional acts and the Biden administration because they sold down the SPR in 2022. So we'll show this on the next slide, but there's a lot of bills that are tied to this, and frankly, let's just go to it now. This is a good table view of the congressionally mandated oil sales out of the SPR that are tied to a lot of these bills. So as you can see, the Budget Act of 2015, as part of that bill to help pay for that bill, they were planning to do 5 million barrels of sales in 2018 through 2021, 8 million in 22, 10 million in 23, and so on and so forth. And you can see the timelines laid out here. So switching back to this, what the Biden administration said was, hey, we were going to sell these oil anyways. We're just going to sell it faster to help mitigate the price spike that we've seen for Ukraine and Russia. They did sell more than what was actually congressionally mandated through 2027. So what the increase that you see here was a part of a buyback program they did. And I believe it was around 60 million barrels that they bought back to get it to kind of the level that it would have leveled off at in 2027 as part of those congressionally mandated sales. So that's the story of the Biden administration sales. I will say they did do a sales program where they sold it around $95. The buybacks that they did were around $75. So the U.S. Treasury does get to collect the money on the difference between those two. So if you're looking at it purely from a monetary standpoint and pushing aside the risks of drawing down the SPR this much, it was a good thing for the U.S. taxpayer as they were buying or selling oil at $95 and then buying it back at $75. So one other thing I'd like to note, you'll notice in this graph that this line continues on a downward trajectory until 2031. That is because there was a 2021 infrastructure bill noted here that sold down 88 million barrels. That's not included in this table here. This is an old table, so I would note this, and we will get to this a little bit later. A good time now to talk about what the current sales program looks like, and it's not under the Trump administration. In March, due to the Iran conflict, war, whatever you want to call it, we did decide to do a sale or an exchange in this case, along with several other countries' SPRs, to draw down a significant amount of our storage levels to help mitigate the price spike due to the Iran conflict. So, unlike the Biden administration's program, which was a lot of it, most of it was just a purely sales program where they were selling the oil, the money comes into the treasury, they bought back some at a lower price, so that money goes out. Obviously, when that happens, this one's a little bit different under the Trump administration. What they're doing is an exchange program. So what they're doing is there's no money that are changing hands for the oil. They're putting out, hey, we are willing to sell oil for delivery during June, July, August. So in this RFP, the delivery period for the oil is June, July, August. You don't pay us any money, but in return, in the future, sometime in 2027 or 2028, you have to return the oil to us that we sold you or that we gave to you with interest. So you have to pay back in kind or with more oil, a higher amount. Give us back more oil, essentially. So if someone's doing 1 million barrels a day, a marketer decides to take part in this program, and we're delivering them 1 million barrels a day, they would have to return, depending on the time frame of the return, whether it's 2027, 2028, or 2029, they would have to return somewhere between 18 and 24% more oil back to us. So that's how the exchange works. Again, there's no money changing hands, and this is actually kind of a clever way of doing an SPR drawdown because the oil curves in such backwardation, you can actually get more oil back than what you actually took out. So this will actually help refill the storage levels back to higher than what they were when they started drawing down these barrels. And we'll get to that in a minute here. So as a part of the current exchange program, there's been 4 RFPs that have come out. The first one was in mid-March. The last one was in late April, where they offer up a certain amount of barrels. So the first one was an offer of 86 million barrels. Of those 86 million barrels, 45 were awarded, or people took 45 million of those barrels. As you can see, there's still about 39 million barrels left of this announced SPR for a future RFP. So the other thing I'd like to note is the delivery period for all of these RFPs is in the anywhere from the April to August timeframe. So that's when the oil is actually going to be taken out of the SPR, is really in those summer months where summer driving season. It is in the near term where we're delivering that oil to the market, and the return is anywhere from really November of 2026, right after the election, until 2029. So a slow return of that oil back in. So what does that look like? So here's the Iran conflict up here. We talked about the blue, that's historical. As you can see, we started to draw down in April. The orange here is my estimate of what the SPR drawdown will look like. And what I've assumed here is we do that final RFP. So you have the full 170 million barrels plus of announced oil that gets taken out. I have it being taken all out by the time September rolls around. And then you have a lull period, and then starting in November, they slowly start to refill the SPR via those exchange agreements. Now, we don't know exactly what the cadence of these returns will be, but I've just assumed it's kind of ratably over the course of what they offered for return periods through 2029. So something to notice here is you actually, versus what the black line would have been under the congressionally mandated sales, you actually refill the SPR higher than if you didn't do this at all. So those looking for a bright spot of taking down this SPR, again, I think you put yourself in risk drawing down an SPR like this. Maybe the risk is worth it. But one of the upsides is if you had just let the congressionally mandated sales happen, you'd end up with a lower level in the SPR than if you did the exchange. Because with the exchange, the people who borrowed the oil here have to return back more than they actually borrowed. So you end up with a higher level of oil than if you just had let the congressionally mandated sales happen on their own. Notice There's future sales here. We talked about that earlier. That's the 87 million barrels of program that runs from 2028, fiscal 2028 through fiscal 2031. So even after we fill this a little bit, we still have congressionally mandated sales from 2028 to 2031 that will draw this down even more. So hopefully that helps, folks. I know that helped crystallize things in my head of like what the drawdown is going to look like. And this is a lot of oil. This is really what's keeping prices down is the U.S.'s SPR program and some other countries' SPR programs really dumping a ton of oil onto the market to help fill the supply gap. I would note, as it stands right now, things could certainly change, but these exchange agreements, the oil has to be returned. And to be returned, these marketers will have to go into the open market and buy that oil back. So you could have a period here after November where you're getting very price supportive buybacks in the market of that crude oil. Hopefully the Iran conflict solved by then. If not, you're in a really sticky spot with a very low SPR level there. So something to think about from the price sensitive standpoint, or some of you guys that are equity investors looking at what kind of the E&Ps are looking at. This is a pretty supportive time frame here. I mean, you're not having massive buybacks, but this is a fairly supportive arc as the U.S. and we've not shown on the graph, but other countries will presumably be buying back their crude to help refill their storage or their SPR storage. So we'll dive into some of the infrastructure on part 2, part 3, part 4, however many parts I do, and some of the specific facilities. But I think that's a good overview of the SPR, and hopefully y'all learned something. I know I did when I was putting this together. So feel free to reach out. Platform is free trials on our platform. If you've seen those in other videos, don't be shy. Reach out. I'm happy to work with folks. Hope everybody has a good week, and we'll be back probably early next week with another one of these. So part 2 of one of these.